Have you ever heard the legend they call Betrayal in the desert? Two war brothers, Tom and Ben, heroes to their town, bound by blood and steel. Tom, the sharp mind, always a step ahead. Ben, the fearless gun, bold and fiery. One night, in a smoky saloon, they caught wind of silver still buried deep in an old mine. Riches enough to change a man's life. So they rode out together, chasing fortune across the burning sands. Folks remember it now as a tale of courage, of sacrifice, of friendship unbroken. But what they don't know is that out there, beneath the desert sun, one heart was torn by greed. And the truth of that betrayal? Only one man carried it home. The town of Red Rock was a lonely speck of dust on the endless frontier, a place where the desert wind seemed to carry both secrets and sins. On its single main street, where horses were tied outside weather-beaten buildings, stood the saloon, the heart of gossip, whiskey, and trouble. Inside, the smell of smoke and sweat hung thick, and the piano's tired notes mingled with drunken laughter. At a table near the corner sat two men who could silence the room if they wished, Tom Callahan and Ben Carter. Veterans of the border wars, they were spoken of as heroes, the kind of men who had faced death more than once and returned alive. Their names carried weight, though in different ways. Tom was known as the thinker, the strategist who saw patterns where others saw chaos. His sharp eyes rarely missed a detail, and his calm voice often hid a calculating mind that measured every risk before taking it. He carried himself with quiet confidence, wearing a worn black coat and a revolver that looked as if it had seen as much history as he had. Ben, on the other hand, was a storm in human form. Broad-shouldered, brash, and quick to laughter or anger, he lived by instinct rather than reason. Where Tom paused to think, Ben charged ahead. His reputation as a fighter was as large as his appetite for whiskey. He wore a dusty brown vest and a grin that was equal parts charm and danger. That night, as glasses clinked and dice rolled, a hushed story passed from mouth to mouth. A traveling prospector, grey-bearded and half-drunk, swore he had stumbled upon an abandoned silver mine deep in the desert hills. The old man spoke of veins still glittering in the rock, of riches left behind when miners fled years ago after a cave-in. Most laughed him off, calling it a drunkard's tale. But Tom listened with narrowed eyes and Ben with a restless hunger. When the prospector finally stumbled out into the street, Ben leaned forward across the table. "You heard him, Tom. Silver. Enough to set us up for life?" Tom stroked his chin. "Could be another fool's dream. Or it could be real. If it is, we'll need more than guns. We'll need caution." "Caution?" Ben scoffed, slamming his glass down. "We've faced worse than a pile of rocks. You and me, together, we could take it all." Tom's gaze hardened. "Together, Ben. Remember that." They shared a silence, the kind only men who had bled side by side could understand. But in Ben's mind, the word together rang hollow. Why split treasure when one man's hands could hold it all? His grin stayed on his face, but his thoughts were darker. The saloon door swung open, letting in the cool night breeze. Outside, the desert stretched wide and endless, a sea of shadows under the moon. It whispered promises of fortune, and perhaps of betrayal. That night, in Red Rock, a decision was made. Two friends, bound by war and brotherhood, would ride into the desert in search of silver. Neither of them knew that what they would truly find was the weight of greed, the price of trust, and the shadow of betrayal waiting beneath the desert stars. The dawn broke over Red Rock in a blaze of red and gold, painting the horizon with fire. Tom and Ben mounted their horses outside the livery stable, saddlebags stuffed with dried meat, water flasks, and coils of rope. The blacksmith watched them ride out, shaking his head as if he knew men chasing fortune seldom returned the same. The desert greeted them with silence. No sound but the clop of hooves and the wind brushing across endless plains of dust and stone. Heat shimmered on the horizon even before midday, and the air was dry enough to crack a man's lips in hours. Still, the two riders pressed on, their shadows stretching long across the earth. At first, the road felt almost like old times. They traded jokes about the war, stories of narrow escapes, and half-hearted curses about the officers who had left them to fend for themselves. But beneath the laughter was an unease, a thin thread of tension that neither named. Tom rode slightly ahead, his eyes sweeping the land with the same focus he had once used to study enemy lines. Every rise and dip in the terrain, every circling vulture, every wisp of smoke in the distance, he noted it all. His mind mapped the desert as though it were another battlefield. Ben lagged a little behind, his eyes not on the horizon but on Tom. He saw the steady hands on the reins, the calm posture, the patience. It gnawed at him. Tom had always been the one with the plans, the one who turned chaos into order. Ben told himself it didn't matter, but the thought kept returning, why should he, Ben Carter, always be the second man? As the sun climbed, they stopped to water the horses at a shallow stream barely trickling between rocks. Tom crouched and filled his flask, his reflection rippling in the water. "We'll make camp near the ridges tonight," he said. "That way we'll have cover." Ben spat into the sand. "You think like every step's another war." "War taught me to live," Tom replied without looking up. "And if you want to live long enough to see that silver, you'll learn the same." The words stung more than they should have. Ben said nothing, but inside, resentment swelled. By afternoon, the desert began to change. Tracks appeared in the dust, not animal, but human. Wagon ruts, half-buried, and footprints leading nowhere. Tom reined in his horse, studying them carefully. Smoke curled faintly on the horizon, the kind made by campfires or worse. "Someone's out here," Tom muttered. Ben grinned and loosened the revolver at his hip. "Good. I've been itching for some action." Tom gave him a hard look. "Action gets men killed. Keep your gun ready, but keep your head cooler than that barrel." The sky turned copper as the sun sank low. Shadows stretched long across the ridges, and the desert air grew cooler. They rode in silence now, the weight of unseen eyes pressing in on them. When they finally made camp, the fire was small, the night vast and heavy. Coyotes howled in the distance, and the stars glittered cold above. Tom lay awake, staring at the sky, thinking of routes, of risks, of plans. Ben lay beside him, eyes open, staring at the fire, thinking not of plans but of silver, and of Tom standing in his way. The desert had begun to test them, and though no shot had been fired, the first battle was already brewing, not with outlaws, but within the heart of a man. The morning sun rose hard and white, burning the mist off the desert. Tom and Ben had barely finished breaking camp when the silence shattered. A shot cracked from the ridges above, kicking dust near Tom's boots. The horses reared, and echoes of laughter rolled down from the rocks. Outlaws! A dozen at least, shadows shifting on the canyon rim. They had been followed, stalked like prey through the night. Ben's gun was in his hand in a heartbeat. "Finally," he growled, eyes blazing. "I'll send them running." He fired wildly at the ridges. "Hold your fire!" Tom barked, pulling Ben's arm down. His mind worked fast, tracing the walls of the canyon, the scrub grass, the lay of the wind. Running or fighting straight on meant death. But chaos could be turned into order, if one knew how. The outlaws began to close in, rifles glinting in the sun. Bullets sparked off stone, and dirt sprayed as the canyon floor lit up with gunfire. Ben cursed and tried to charge forward, but Tom grabbed him by the collar and dragged him toward a patch of brittle grass and brush dried by weeks of heat. "Trust me!" Tom shouted over the gunfire. He struck a match with his teeth and tossed it. The grass caught instantly, flames roaring to life as the desert wind fanned the fire into a wall of smoke. The canyon filled with confusion. The outlaws coughed, their shots growing wild as smoke blinded their aim. Horses panicked, whinnying and breaking free. Tom pulled Ben low to the ground, guiding him through the haze like a soldier leading men through smoke on the battlefield. Together they burst out the far end of the canyon, lungs burning, sweat streaking down their faces. Behind them, the fire snapped and raged, and the shouts of the bandits turned to curses of retreat. They rode hard until the gunfire faded, until only the pounding of hooves and the dry rush of the wind filled their ears. At last they slowed, gasping for breath, their clothes stinking of smoke. Tom's eyes were sharp and cold. "If you'd rushed them, we'd both be dead." Ben scowled, chest heaving. "And if it weren't for your games, I'd have had my chance to put a bullet between their eyes." "You think with your trigger," Tom said flatly. "That's why you'll always need me." The words cut deeper than any bullet. Ben bit back his retort, but fury smoldered behind his glare. Once again, it had been Tom's plan that saved them. Once again. They rode in silence the rest of the day, tension as thick as the desert dust. Tom scanned the horizon for threats, but never once did he look back at Ben. And Ben, clutching the reins tight, was no longer thinking of outlaws. He was thinking of Silver, and of how one man could stand in his way. That night, their campfire burned low. Coyotes howled, and the desert wind hissed through the rocks like a warning. Neither man slept easily. The canyon had shown them more than danger, it had shown the growing fracture between them, a crack that no war, no memory, no oath of brotherhood. By the third day, the desert gave way to hills scarred with old trails and forgotten mine shafts. The air grew cooler, shadows stretched longer across the ridges, and the smell of stone and dust replaced the endless heat of the flats. Tom led the way, his eyes scanning for landmarks whispered of in the saloon, jagged rocks shaped like teeth, a ridge that curved like a crescent moon. At last, near sundown, they found it, the mouth of a mine half buried in rubble, its timbers rotting and splintered. A yawning darkness breathed cold air into the fading light. Ben dismounted first, his boots crunching on gravel. He stared into the opening, a grin spreading across his smoke-stained face. "You see it, Tom? This is it. Silver, waiting for us. Waiting for me." Tom approached slower, running a hand over the weathered beams. He felt the old scars of explosions, the blackened edges where men had once worked and died. "Waiting, maybe," he muttered. But a mine doesn't give its treasure without cost. They lit their lanterns and stepped inside. The air was damp, heavy with silence, broken only by the drip of unseen water. Their footsteps echoed along the wooden supports, and the deeper they went, the brighter the walls shimmered. Silver veins crisscrossed the stone like frozen lightning, glowing in the flicker of the flame. Ben's breath caught. He reached out, fingers trembling, and chipped free a chunk of ore with his knife. The raw silver gleamed in his palm, a mirror of his own hungry eyes. "It's real," he whispered. "It's all real." Tom studied the walls, calculating weight, risk, collapse. His mind saw not just treasure, but danger, supports ready to give way, pockets of gas, the ghosts of men buried alive. He gathered what he could carry in his pack, moving methodically, speaking little. But Ben was different. He scooped every loose piece he could find, stuffing his vest, his pockets, his saddlebags. He laughed under his breath, the sound echoing madly in the dark. The silver wasn't just wealth, it was proof that luck had finally chosen him. "Slow down," Tom warned. "You take more than we can carry, we'll pay for it in sweat and blood." Ben's laugh cut sharper. "You think too small, Tom. Always planning, always cautious." This, he held up a jagged hunk of ore, gleaming like firelight in his hand, "this is enough to make us kings." Tom looked at him, the shadows deep on his face. "Or enough to bury us both." The mine swallowed the sound of their footsteps as if the earth itself conspired to keep secrets. Hours passed in the dark, lanterns flickering low, and the air grew heavier with every breath. The silver walls shimmered faintly, mocking them with their cold beauty. Ben's pack was near bursting, but still he wanted more. He eyed Tom moving carefully, checking beams and timbers before prying all loose, always cautious, always calculating. It sickened him. Tom didn't deserve half of this. No one did. At the next rest, Tom pulled his flask and wiped the dust from his lips. He offered it to Ben. Ben's hand hesitated, then gripped his own flask instead, uncorking it with a forced smile. Inside, a few grains of bitter powder clung to the liquid, crushed leaves he'd taken from a trader in Red Rock, said to stop a man's heart in his sleep. His pulse thundered as he held it out. "Drink," he said lightly. to fortune. But Tom, ever cautious, narrowed his eyes. He took the flask, tilted it, and the smell hit him. Not whiskey. Something sharp, unnatural. Slowly, deliberately, Tom set it down on the rock between them. "Careful what you pour me, Ben," he said softly. The words cut like a knife. Ben's smile faltered, rage boiling through his veins. "Always the suspicious one," he spat. "Always watching, always thinking you're better than me." Tom rose slowly, hand drifting to his revolver. "You tried to poison me." Ben's eyes burned. "I should have done it years ago." They lunged at each other, fists and fury colliding in the half-light. The cave shook with their struggle, lanterns swinging wildly, shadows thrashing against silver-veined walls. Ben's brute strength crashed against Tom's precision, each blow echoing like thunder underground. Their fight tumbled deeper into the shaft, or scattering under their boots. A misplaced kick sent one of Tom's packs crashing into a crate of old supplies, blasting powder and sticks of dynamite, left by miners decades before. The lantern tipped. The flame caught. A roar split the mine, the ground itself convulsing. Stone cracked, timbers splintered, and silver veins burst with a screech like tearing metal. The blast hurled both men to the ground. Dust and smoke swallowed the light, choking their lungs. Tom staggered up, ears ringing, eyes burning. Through the haze he saw Ben pinned beneath a fallen beam, blood streaking his forehead. The earth groaned above them as more rock tumbled, sealing exits, burying tunnels. Ben coughed, reaching out, his voice raw with desperation. "Tom, help me." But Tom's chest heaved with fury. The poison, the betrayal, it all seared in his mind. He stood in the wreckage, torn between rage and loyalty, his hand trembling over the revolver at his side. The silver glittered faintly through the dust, as if mocking them both. Wealth beyond measure lay all around, but the mine demanded payment in blood. The mine groaned like a wounded beast, each shudder threatening to bring the mountain down upon them. Dust thickened the air until every breath felt like swallowing ash. Stones clattered from above, and the broken beams creaked as if whispering their final warning. Tom staggered forward, blood running from a cut on his temple. His ears rang with the echo of the explosion, but one sound pierced through, Ben's desperate cries. Pinned beneath a splintered beam, Ben clawed at the rubble with his free hand. His face was pale, streaked with sweat and grime, eyes wide with terror. "Tom! Please, help me!" His voice cracked, a mix of fear and shame. Tom froze. Every muscle screamed to move, but his mind twisted in conflict. He saw the flask again, the bitter stench of poison. He saw Ben's hand lunging for his throat, the betrayal burning brighter than the lanterns that once lit their path. His revolver felt heavy at his side. One thought, dark and simple, whispered in his mind, "Leave him. Leave the traitor, take the silver, and walk out alive." But then another memory surged forward, the war. Knights huddled in trenches, bullets raining from the dark sky. Ben's laugh echoing through the chaos. Ben hauling him onto a horse when Tom's leg had given out. The blood oath they had sworn with brothers long gone, "We watch each other's backs." Tom's chest heaved, torn between past and present. He cursed under his breath and tossed the revolver aside. With a grunt, he shoved at the beam. It groaned but held. He pushed harder, veins straining, muscles screaming, until finally the timber shifted enough for Ben to crawl free, gasping, coughing, alive. Ben collapsed beside him, too weak to stand, blood staining his shirt. He looked up at Tom, shame flickering in his eyes but fading quickly, replaced by something unreadable. "Why?" he rasped. Tom leaned back against the wall, chest heaving, face shadowed with exhaustion. "Because once, you were my brother," he muttered. Above them, another rumble shook loose a rain of gravel. The mine was dying, its tunnels collapsing into blackness. Tom hauled Ben up, slinging his arm over his shoulder. Together they stumbled toward the faint glimmer of moonlight seeping through the cracks of the entrance. Each step was agony, but somehow they emerged into the night. The desert greeted them with silence, stars glittering cold and distant above. Behind, the mine shuddered once more, sealing its treasure forever under a mountain of stone. Tom laid Ben down on the sand, both of them coughing up dust, lungs raw, hearts pounding. For a long time neither spoke. The only sound was the hiss of the cooling earth and the whisper of the desert wind. At last, Tom looked at the man he had just saved, the man who had tried to kill him. He saw not a brother, not even a friend, but something far more complicated, the shadow of loyalty twisted by greed. And he knew, this was not the end. The night was far from silent. No sooner had Tom dragged Ben clear of the collapsed mine than a low whistle split the air. Shadows moved along the ridge line, and the glint of rifles caught the starlight. The outlaws had returned, drawn by the blast like vultures to carrion. Tom cursed under his breath. His revolver felt almost empty, the spare rounds were buried back in the mine. He pushed Ben down behind a boulder just as the first shot cracked, sparking against stone. The desert erupted with gunfire. Bullets screamed through the night, kicking up sand, tearing splinters from the rocks. Tom fired back, each shot measured and deliberate, but for every outlaw that ducked away, two more pressed closer. Ben tried to lift his revolver, his hand trembling, but the wound in his side robbed him of strength. "Tom," he gasped, voice raw, "they'll kill us both." Tom's eyes never left the ridgeline. "Then we make them pay for it." But deep down, he knew the truth. They were cornered, outnumbered, with nowhere left to run. The outlaws whooped and jeered, their shadows growing larger as they crept closer. The muzzle flashes lit their faces in jagged bursts, grins hungry for blood and silver. Tom leaned out to fire again, his jaw set. A bullet grazed his arm, tearing fabric and flesh. He hissed, teeth clenched, but stayed on his feet. Then something shifted in Ben's eyes. The shame from the mine, the weight of Tom's mercy, all twisted into a single, desperate clarity. For once, there was no greed in his gaze, only the stubborn spark of brotherhood they had once sworn never to break. He gripped Tom's shoulder, forcing him back behind cover. "You gave me your hand," he rasped. "Now I'll give you mine." Before Tom could stop him, Ben surged to his feet, revolver raised. He stumbled into the open, roaring like a wounded bear, firing wildly at the ridges. Bullets tore into him instantly, driving him back, but he stood his ground, every shot buying Tom another breath. The outlaws focused on him, pouring fire into his staggering form. And still he fought, coughing blood, eyes blazing, until one final bullet drove him to his knees. Tom shouted his name, but the night swallowed the sound. Ben collapsed, his revolver clattering beside him, his chest heaving in shallow gasps. The outlaws, startled by his ferocity, hesitated just long enough for Tom to drag himself behind another rock, reloading his last bullets. Ben turned his head, blood darkening the sand. His lips curled into something between a grin and a grimace. "Go," he whispered. "Make it mean something." His hand fell limp, his breath stilled, and the desert claimed him. The gunfire echoed on, but for Tom, the world had gone strangely quiet. The desert was quiet again by dawn. Smoke from the gunfight drifted low, carrying the bitter stench of gunpowder and death. Tom sat slumped against a rock, revolver heavy in his hand, eyes fixed on the lifeless body of Ben sprawled in the sand. His friend. His betrayer. His brother. The outlaws were gone, those still breathing had fled into the night, broken by the fury of Ben's last stand. Silence stretched wide across the ridges, broken only by the cry of a distant hawk. Tom holstered his revolver with shaking hands and forced himself to his feet. He stumbled to Ben's side and knelt. For a moment he could not look at the face, pale beneath streaks of dust and blood. Memories blurred in his mind, the war, the laughter, the nights by the fire when they swore they would live or die together. Then the poison, the lies, the fire of betrayal in the mine. Tom closed Ben's eyes with a trembling hand. "You died a hero to them," he whispered. "And maybe that's enough." He buried Ben in the desert sand, marking the grave with a simple wooden cross cut from a broken beam. no words carved, only silence and the endless sky to witness it. Days later, Tom rode back into Red Rock alone. The townsfolk gathered as soon as they saw him, whispering, asking questions. Where was Ben? What happened in the desert? Tom slid from his horse, his face weathered by dust and grief. Ben Carter, he said, his voice steady though his heart was not, saved my life. He stood against a dozen outlaws when I could not. He died fighting, so I could return. The saloon fell silent. Then someone raised a glass, and another followed, until the room rang with voices, to Ben Carter. A hero! They would never know the whole story. They would never know of the poison, the mine, the choice that nearly split a brotherhood. To the town, Ben was immortal now, a legend carved from courage. Tom sat alone at the bar that night, his drink untouched. The cheers faded behind him, but in his mind the truth burned too bright to drown in whiskey. Ben had betrayed him, but in the end, he had chosen loyalty over greed, at the cost of his life. The desert would keep its secrets. The mine lay buried forever, silver sealed in stone. And Tom carried the weight of truth alone, a story no one else would hear. Outside, the wind swept through Red Rock, lifting dust into the twilight. Somewhere beyond the horizon lay the grave of Ben Carter, nameless but not forgotten. And in the whispers of the town, in the legends passed from mouth to mouth, two friends would always ride together, heroes of the desert, bound by blood and betrayal.